Hi, this is Ken. This presentation is about getting the best vocal sound quality, and it's meant as a guide for the WEC worship teams, both the tech team and musicians and vocalists. So whether you're a vocalist or part of the tech team, understanding how sound behaves can really help us achieve a clearer and a warmer vocal sound in worship. In this guide, we're going to focus on how EQ, equalisation, that is, can be used to shape vocal tone, reduce harshness, and help ensure a pleasant vocal lead, blending well with the instruments without getting lost. And we'll consider a couple of other factors as well as the use of EQ as we go. But why frequencies matter for vocal sound? Well, every sound we hear is made up of a whole set of different frequencies, measured in hertz, cycles per second, low notes of lower frequencies, higher notes of higher frequencies. For example, a piano note A above middle C, the note that would be used to tune an orchestra to from the oboe, is at 440 cycles per second. The A below that is exactly half, 220 hertz. And if you go down another octave, then you get to 110 hertz. That's pretty close to the lower limit for most male voices. Some will go a little bit below 100 hertz. So vocal ranges, a typical vocal range for male voices would somewhere between 100 and 300 hertz. Whereas for female voices, which will begin higher and top out higher as well, they tend to range from maybe 175 or 200 hertz up to even over 700 hertz towards 800, depending on the singer. But here's the challenge. Pianos and guitars often occupy exactly the same type of frequency space as vocals, and that can create a crowded mix if we're not careful about arrangements and also technical settings. Now, the EQ can impact all the sounds that come into the sound desk before they're actually replayed through the system to the speakers and or live stream indeed these days. But we're going to focus purely in this session on vocal EQ adjustments. So what does the EQ display show us? We've done some recordings which are on the video screen here. You can see a visual frequency analysis of a recording during one of the recent church services. Each wave represents the intensity of sound at that frequency, and effectively what we hear is made up of a complex set of frequencies from instruments and voices. The low frequencies, meaning below, say, 150 hertz, would be the bass instruments or the low end of a piano, and the deepest of male voices. Now, there's none in this recording we're using as an example. So in this frequency range, really just the piano. Mid-range, 150 up to 800 hertz. Well, most of the vocal power and warmth lives right here. Piano and guitar overlap with the vocals in this space, in this recording. High mids, and that would be, say, from 2 to 5 kilohertz, that impacts clarity of diction and tonal edge, if you like, sometimes referred to as presence, but also potential harshness, and that's what we're trying to deal with here. These are harmonics. These are not the fundamental notes that are played on the instruments or sung by the voices. Now, some mixing boards will have a couple of mids. They'll have high mids and low mids. What we have in WEC is just one set of mid controls. However, in the video analysis, you will see really two mid-range adjustments. One high, up at about 3 to 4 kilohertz, and the other much lower, around about 4 to 500 hertz. The highs impact airiness and brightness, but can get very brittle. That's highs that it would be maybe in the 12 kilohertz and upwards range. By the way, when you get to adulthood, or indeed middle age and elder ages, then our hearing as humans drops off in the higher frequencies quite significantly. So people over 50 or 60 will hear very little components of sound above about 12 to 15 kilohertz. Now, the video contains a listening example. And in the original track, Vicky's vocal, although sung beautifully, it sounds somewhat harsh in her higher registers. Now that's because there's just too much energy in the high to mid frequencies, and the contributions to that are probably her use of the microphone, the choice of microphone that she has had allocated to her, as well as the EQ settings at the mixing desk. So, in this recording, we've tried to modify that by applying two EQ changes. One at the high end, an 8 to 12 decibel dip. Don't worry about the technicalities there. That's quite a significant dip to reduce the frequency components in the 3 to 4 kilohertz range. And that is aimed specifically to reduce harshness and help bring a smoother sound. Also, we've added a gentle boost, 3 to 5 decibel boost, around about 500 hertz, to add some more warmth to the overall sound. And the result is a clearer, much more pleasant sound, where the voice sits more comfortably in the mix. Still clear, still good diction, but less stress for the congregation or live streaming audiences. Now, moving on to other factors than just the EQ settings on the desk. First topic is the microphone choice, and microphone choice can matter significantly. Different mics pick up and shape sounds differently. We're going to look at the Shure SM58 versus the Sennheiser E835, which would be seen as pretty well direct competitors in the mid-range budget, but good quality professional mics. Shure SM58 would be considered the de facto industrial standard at a moderate cost. They're reliable, generally warm sounding. They do have a strong proximity effect, so-called, which means that the voice signal sent up to the desk gets richer when you sing closer, particularly within 1 to 3 inches, for example. That's great for voices which will benefit from the mellowing effect that has. And Vicky and Sarah at WEC, their voices would be good examples for the use of an SM58. The other mics that are to hand are Sennheisers. I think they're E835s, I hope they are. It is a popular alternative to the SM58, maybe slightly less expensive, but roughly the same price band. But they're generally brighter and have a smoother, a less pronounced proximity effect. And that means that there are an alternative for mellower voices such as Ruth or Chloe, although we may still prefer to use the SM58 for their overall performance. If you're using the Sennheisers, then they would be effective for Ruth and Chloe's voices with careful use of the EQ on the desk. They are pretty well designed to add clarity of diction and a little bit of energy at the higher frequencies, which is why they're not good for voices that are already a little bit on the harsh side at higher registers. And I would class Sarah's voice and Vicky's voice in that category. So, general tip would be that if you're using an SM58, then get closer, take full advantage of the proximity effect. If you're using an E835, then being close will still help, but its proximity effect is less It's less sensitive to distance, and therefore more compensation for warmth would be appropriate on the desk if that's your voice type. So how does EQ work on the desk? What are the adjustments, and how can we make EQ adjustments on the mixer? So let's first of all look at what the controls are and what these settings do on the mixer desk. There are 4 EQ controls per channel. From top to bottom, the high, which is centered around 12 kilohertz, that means it controls very high frequencies, which are going to make fairly minimal effect on most voices. They may slightly brighten or soften a tone if you boost or if you reduce them. But the second one is the one that really matters, and that's a mid-range combination of 2 controls. This is the key area for adjusting vocal tone. There's a white knob, and you use that to set the center frequency around which the blue knob will control the boost or the reduction around a range of frequencies centered on the setting determined by the white knob. The range of the white knob control takes us from, I think, around about 100 Hz right up to 8 kilohertz, but we're going to set it for our purposes in somewhere in the 2.5 to 4 kilohertz range. I would suggest looking at setting it somewhere between 2 and 3. And then use the blue knob to boost or to reduce around that frequency. And we use boosting for those who need to take advantage of EQ to get the best diction and clarity. And we use reduction to reduce harshness from those who have that kind of voice type. Now, some mixer desks have both a high mid and a low mid control. That's not the case here at WEC, but similar principles apply as to how to use it. And in this case, if you had a desk with a low mid, I would suggest boosting it around about 500 Hz, as you have seen in the analysis for the recording. Boosting around there can add fullness, but too much of it can begin to sound honky, so you need to use this frequency range control on the EQ somewhat judiciously. You can certainly reduce it if you find that the sound is somewhat muddy or muggy. The low control is not going to make an audible difference to most of your vocals. If you have a very low bass male voice, which I don't think we have in our congregation, then it could be used to boost that. Otherwise, it's really irrelevant for vocals, in which case you should just set it as a neutral for the vocal channel. However, these are important controls to minimize mugginess from the piano bass, which can be a problem, and also can be set to cut issues where there's reverberation from particular standing waves at low frequencies, again from piano typically, maybe even from guitar at the low end. There's a table which just summarizes the differences for who should be using the SM58 or E835s and how they should be used with the EQ. Final tips for vocalists: stay close to the mic, within 1 to 2 inches if at all possible, and sing consistently. Avoid moving in and out, particularly during a phrase. Now, you may need to move out away from the mic if you have a particularly strong voice and at a high energy part of a song. But you should also be able to rely on the sound desk team to adjust for changes in dynamics, if necessary, which affect the mix. Be aware of your role as a vocalist, whether you're leading or supporting, and listen to others so that you can take your place as best as possibly as you can tell within the mix, and trust that the tech team do their job to make that well produced for the congregation. Make sure you're using the right mic for your voice. Don't just go to any mic, but try to make sure that you have the best mic type that's going to enhance the overall quality of your voice. And if something's just not right, sounds too harsh, sounds too muddy, let the tech team know during your preparation time. A few words for the sound team. When you're mixing, then aim to create space for the vocals by cutting competing frequencies in instruments. Now that means using EQ to cut space in that mid-range area between, say, 300 and 600 hertz, so that the piano is not dominating, so that the violin is not coming through too clearly in that space, so that the flute also is appropriately positioned within the mix. These instruments all would compete with the vocals, and if you're aiming to have a clear vocal lead, as I believe you should have, then that's one of the ways that you can do that. There's another way of helping to separate the sounds from just all overlapping with each other positionally, and as well as EQ, use the panning controls. These effectively allow you to move the sound as it's perceived right and left in your stereophonic sound field, so that you can position the instruments and voices right and left as they're perceived by the listeners and the congregation. That just helps create a little bit of separation and a little bit more sense of space, less stress for the audience, a better match to their visual perception of where people are set. And whatever you do, make gentle and musically sensitive adjustments on the sound desk. Avoid extreme boosts or extreme cuts, and avoid making changes that are too fast. So in summary, understanding vocal frequencies helps both singers and the tech teams create a much more satisfactory sound quality in a live service. Use EQ to reduce harshness and boost warmth, using the center-mid controls judiciously, depending on the nature of the vocal voice, depending on the song possibly, and depending on the choice of microphone. And make sure, as well as the appropriate microphone choice for the voice, encourage the singers, the vocalists, to use the distance to the mic in a way that will enhance the quality of their voice. Now, I hope that all helps, that we can look at the same considerations for the instruments in a different session, if you like.